Hi everyone, VanMan here. Red, Blue, and Yellow, the trifecta of Gen 1 Pokemon games. Upon Pokemon Red and Blue's release in the mid-90s, they were an instant hit, and then the Pokemon anime was created based on those games, and then Pokemon Yellow was created as a sequel to Pokemon Red and Blue to more closely resemble the anime. As far as in-game mechanics are concerned, all three games are extremely similar in the grand scheme of things, in that they all have the same overworld map, the same storyline, the same missions to complete, the same trainers to battle, and the same Pokedex of 151 Pokemon. But there are some key differences as well, such as a small handful of version-exclusive Pokemon that are only available in one game or another, and the most important difference being that in Pokemon Red and Blue, the player begins their journey by choosing either Bulbasaur or Charmander or Squirtle as their starter Pokemon, but in Pokemon Yellow the starter is changed to Pikachu. And to the casual observer, that may be where the list of differences ends, but for committed Pokemon challenge runners such as myself, the differences between these games run much deeper, and here today to help us explore that is my good friend and fellow PokeTuber, Scott's Thoughts, whose entire channel is devoted to testing how fast he can play through all of Pokemon Yellow with only a single Pokemon, just as my channel is devoted to the same for Pokemon Red and Blue. So in that light, today's video will be a double feature. I will be playing a first attempt speedrun of Pokemon Blue, while my friend Scott simultaneously plays a first attempt speedrun of Pokemon Yellow to compare the results. And before beginning this run, Scott and I sat down to discuss which starter Pokemon would be best to represent such a challenge, and we eventually decided on Nidoran, partly because we wanted to select a Pokemon that neither of us had ever played before, and partly because Nidoran is in an especially interesting position in that its level up moveset is different between Pokemon Blue and Yellow, thus providing an added layer of complexity. Also, this challenge will be split into two parts. On my channel, we will feature a playthrough of Nidoran Male, and on Scott's channel, a playthrough of Nidoran Female. So after this video is over, be sure to click the link in the description to navigate to his video, as well as subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. The full rule set for these runs is in the description below, but in summary, Scott and I can only use Nidoran in battle with no battle items, we can't use any glitches or RNG manipulation, we must save before boss battles and then reset if we lose, and finally, Nidoran's placement in the tier ranking will be determined by its real-world time spent completing the game while playing at 4 times speed. As a challenge for the viewer, feel free to make a prediction in the comments for Nidoran's time of completion in both games, then after the video is over, come back and edit your comment to describe how accurate your prediction was, and also feel free to compare your answer to mine and Scott's, because here's what we had to say.
Okay, so what time do you predict that you're gonna get?
Nidoran is not good. The existence of Alakazam is gonna make this awful.
Oh gosh.
Against a
I
champion.
didn't even
We're gonna
think
have to
of
do
that.
so much over leveling just to get past a champion. I'm predicting around 2 hours.
Okay, I was gonna say like 1 hour and 50 minutes, but that's like an optimistic prediction.
So, will Scott and I be proven correct in our assumptions, or will this poison rabbit power through and surpass our expectations? Let's find out. As soon as we begin the run, we already see one of the crucial differences between Blue and Yellow, which is not only how you pick your starter as I mentioned before, but also which starter is chosen by your rival. In Blue version, the rival chooses the starter that has the type advantage against your starter, which in this case just means the starter that I artificially replaced with Nidoran, and in this run, I thought it would be easiest to have the rival choose Bulbasaur because of Nidoran's resistance to grass type attacks. And in our first battle against the rival, since Bulbasaur and Nidoran do nothing but trade tackles over and over, Nidoran is able to ride its superior attack stat to victory. However, in Yellow version, while the rival will always begin the game with an Eevee, the Pokemon that the Eevee evolves into is determined by the outcome of the first rival battle and one other optional rival battle. That is, if you lose the first battle, the Eevee will evolve into Vaporeon, if you win both battles, the Eevee will evolve into Jolteon, and if you win the first battle and skip the second battle, the Eevee will evolve into Flareon. And today, Scott wins the first rival battle just as I did, meaning that he'll be facing either Flareon or Jolteon, depending on whether he defeats the optional rival later. Then in the next portion of the game after the rival battle, as Scott and I trek across Route 1 in Viridian Forest, we both choose to defeat all the optional trainers to gain experience in preparation for Brock, with the exception that Scott chooses to skip the optional rival, meaning that he will eventually face Flareon when the time comes. However, one of the most important differences between our runs is that in Pokemon Yellow, since the ordinary Pikachu starter would have such a hard time getting past Brock, the game developers decided to show some mercy and grant Nidoran with a move that it learns at level 12 and is super effective against Brock's team, form of Double Kick. However, in Pokemon Blue, Nidoran does not learn Double Kick until level 43, so while Scott manages to exit Viridian Forest and breeze past Brock in only 5.5 minutes, I on the other hand am not so lucky, and I'm instead relegated to Blackout training against a junior trainer in the Pewter gym, meaning that I can utilize the relatively strong Horn Attack to knock out the trainer's Diglett and then lose to the Sandshrew, only to come back and repeat the process over and over again. And this method of training is preferable to knocking out wild Pokemon because trainer battles yield much more experience than wild battles. And not only that, in Nidoran's case, there's actually a way to guarantee that we don't accidentally knock out the Sandshrew, which is to spam Leer against the Diglett to lower its defense while it chips us down to red health, then one-shot it with Horn Attack, then again spam Leer against the Sandshrew to guarantee that it will eventually knock us out, allowing us to blackout train to a much higher level than most other Pokemon would be able to. But while we're busy training, meanwhile Scott treks across Route 3 in Mount Moon, fighting just a handful of extra trainers along the way for experience, pledging his allegiance to the Dark Lord by choosing the Dome Fossil, and making it to Cerulean City at just 9.5 minutes, at which point he immediately decides to face Rival 2 rather than attempting Misty. In his first attempt against the rival, Horn Attack has no problem taking care of Spearow, but then Sandshrew's much higher defense coupled with a series of sand attacks to disrupt his accuracy eventually allow the rival's team to chip his health down to 0. In the next attempt, however, Scott manages to whittle away at Spearow and Sandshrew just in time to avoid Sand Attack, allowing the super effective double kick to one-shot the Rattata and two-shot the Eevee for the win. So now, as Scott heads across Nugget Bridge on the way to Bill's house, let's see how we're doing with our training. Well, we eventually make it to level 15, at which point we attempt Brock, but with as much damage as Geodude's tackle is dealing to us, and as little damage as our Horn Attack is dealing to Geodude, we go into Onix at only around half health. Then against Onix, Horn Attack is dealing even less damage than it was to Geodude, but what's worse is that in blue version, Onix is at a higher level than it is in yellow, allowing it to outspeed, meaning that when it goes for Bide, we have no choice but to attack into it, after which the retaliation knocks us out. So it looks like we'll have to go out and train to an even higher level to have any hope at defeating Brock. But it turns out that something very fortunate happens at level 16, which is that we transition from being slower than the Onix to being faster, which means that this time when it goes for Bide, we can preemptively use Leer both to prevent any damage in the retaliation turn, and also to drastically weaken Onix's defense for when we eventually start attacking again. And although we do lose that attempt because of Onix's Screech to lower our defense, followed by a tackle, on the next attempt, Onix manages to attack us down to red, after which it goes for one final Bide, giving us the chance for one final Horn Attack to knock it out and defeat Brock at 12 minutes and 15 seconds, almost 8 minutes behind Scott. So needless to say, we have some serious ground to cover if we want to catch up with him. But for now, let's check in on Scott and see how he's progressing. Well, in neither yellow nor blue does Nidoran have any problem with Nugget Bridge, but then after completing Nugget Bridge, Scott has a decision to make.
Okay, I thought about this a lot. To do Misty now or to do Misty later? I think now. I don't know if this is a good choice, because like you can go and get Body Slam first.
Well, to start, Horn Attack two-shots the Staryu no problem, with Staryu just getting off a tackle in the meantime, but then Starmie's much more formidable defense means that Horn Attack is only doing a little bit of chip damage, after which Nidoran's poor special is no match for a couple water guns and a bubble beam, and Scott gets taken out. Then in the second attempt, Scott is brought to the exact same fate, and although he could make this battle much easier by heading to the SSN to pick up the TM for Body Slam, Scott has this to say.
Body Slam is much stronger than Horn Attack, but I also don't want to backtrack to this, because then I have to walk back to Vermilion.
And indeed, his persistence is rewarded because in the third attempt, Starmie decides to use Harden not once, not twice, but 3 times, followed by an X-Defend for good measure, which at first prevents Horn Attack from dealing very much damage, but then Scott lucks out with a clutch critical hit, which in Gen 1 bypasses all stat modifications and allows Horn Attack to deal massive damage down to red, followed by the knockout on the next turn, leaving Scott with a Misty split of 16 minutes and 31 seconds. By this point, I've made it almost out of Mount Moon, but first, in an act of heresy, I pledge my allegiance to Lord Helix by taking the Helix fossil, after which we make it to Cerulean City at 16 minutes and 45 seconds. It is also worth noting here that while making our way through Mount Moon, we also caught a Paris to learn the HM for Cut, as well as a Geodude to learn Dig and Strength, and a Pidgey on Route 3 to learn Fly, which is something that comes much easier to Scott playing Pokemon Yellow, because early in his run he's gifted with a free Charmander, which can learn Cut, Dig, and Strength, and later he's gifted with a free Squirtle that can learn both Strength and Surf. So in Yellow, he only has to catch a single Pokemon for the Fly HM, whereas I have to catch several Pokemon to learn all the other HMs as well. But regardless, upon making it to Cerulean City, we then take on the rival. And in blue version, the rival has a different team than he does in yellow. So for us, he opens with Pidgeotto, who, much like the yellow rival Sandshrew, is very fond of Sand Attack. But thankfully in this fight, we managed to avoid Sand Attack, and thanks to us being at a higher level than Scott due to our pre-Brock training, the rival's team stands no chance against Horn Attack, and we win handily on the first attempt. And again now, thanks to our higher level, we sweep through Nugget Bridge even faster faster than Scott did, and again make it back to Cerulean City to face Misty. So now, bear in mind that Scott and I were performing these runs simultaneously on Twitch, and were communicating with one another the entire time. So at this point, I already knew that Scott had defeated Misty using Horn Attack. However, it unfortunately turns out that there is a crucial difference between my Misty fight and his, which is that in Pokemon Blue, Starmie doesn't know the move Harden, meaning that in our case, Starmie will always use attacking moves, making it much more difficult to knock out the Starmie before it does the same to us. So because of that, we attempted this fight several times before I realized that this battle wasn't meant to be just yet. So we abandoned Misty for now, and instead trekked forward to the SSN at 24 minutes and 30 seconds. So upon leaving Cerulean City, we're still a full 8 minutes behind Scott, and we haven't even defeated Misty yet where he has. However, upon making it to the SSN, we get a substantial power upgrade in the form of the TM for Body Slam, which will serve as Nidoran's principal attacking move for the rest of the game. Then, after defeating one optional trainer to pick up a rare candy, we head to face Rival 3, and because at this point we're so overleveled, this fight is never in question and we outspeed and 2-shot Pidgeotto with Body Slam, 2-shot Raticate, 1-shot Kadabra, and 2-shot Ivysaur to finish the battle in the green. As Scott makes it to the SSN, however, his time is still much faster, and like me, he also picks up the TM for Body Slam, but unlike me, makes a slight detour to also pick up the TM for Rest. And to be honest, I really don't understand his decision to do that.
Okay, everyone, I'm not skipping Rest. I refuse to skip Rest on a first playthrough from now on. It always goes very badly when I do.
In what world are we gonna rest?
I don't know.
When is that ever gonna happen?
I don't know. I always get it, just in case.
I mean, like, you're so frail that... I don't know. I don't envision it.
That's what you'd think, but the thing about Rest with the champion in yellow is the Executor is really bad.
Yeah, sure.
And so it like provides you a
I'm not
chance to
facing
heal
Executor,
before
though.
the rest. Yeah, it provides you a chance to heal before the rest of the fight.
So I suppose only time will tell if Scott is rewarded for his decision, but for now, he moves on to face the rival. And in this fight, Body Slam one-shots the entire team except Sandshrew, whose superior defense demands 2 hits to take it down, after which Scott heads straight over to the Vermilion Gym to take on Lieutenant Surge, who certainly could have been a real nuisance, unless this happens.
Surge, you dropped the ball real hard there.
What, did he just growl at you?
He growled like 5 times in a row, and then I just knocked him out with Body Slam slowly. This is one of the worst performances that he's ever given. I cannot believe how bad that was.
So obviously Scott got really lucky in that particular fight, allowing him to dig from Vermilion City back to Cerulean, grab the bike, and then head east through Route 9 and Rock Tunnel. And speaking of the bike, this point of the run actually raises a perpetual debate that Scott and I have between us, which is that he insists that using the bike is faster than walking in some areas of the map, including on Route 9, but my contention is that at 4 times speed, walking is still faster because of the time it takes to operate the items menu, and also the fact that even the slightest error while navigating on the bike will waste more time than you saved. And while yes, Scott has performed tests to demonstrate that the bike is a couple seconds faster in a handful of places, my argument is that those tests are run under overly idealized conditions outside the context of actual gameplay, in which one's attention would be far more divided and therefore far more prone to mistakes. So feel free to comment down below if you think Scott is correct to use the bike, or if I'm correct not to use it. Then up next for me, I'm actually in a position where I can't yet face Lieutenant Surge because Misty's Cascade badge is required to use Cut to access the Vermilion Gym, so we instead dig back to Cerulean City to face Misty. And in the battle, we one-shot Staryu with Body Slam, and 2-shot Starmie for a decisive victory at our higher level. Then as we enter Route 9, we've gained about 1.5 minutes on Scott since the Brock split, presumably thanks to our higher level allowing us to knock out the enemy Pokemon faster, but we're still extremely far behind. And to make matters worse for us, as Scott traverses his way through Rock Tunnel, he comes across one of the next major differences between his run and mine, which is the battle against the self-destructing hiker, so called because his 3 Pokemon, the 2 Geodudes and a Graveler, all know self-destruct. And in this particular run, both mine and Scott's Nidoran are over-leveled enough that we can survive a single self-destruct, but no more than that. And as you might have guessed, Scott's access to the super effective double kick, just like in the Brock fight, allows his Nidoran to knock out each of the enemy Pokemon one by one in painless fashion to avoid the self-destructs and make it past the hiker on the first attempt. However, just like before, my Nidoran is not so fortunate and we have to find another means of overcoming the hiker. So to start, our plan is to open with Leer against each Pokemon to lower their massive defense, then spam Body Slam, all the while hoping that they will use either Tackle, which doesn't inflict very much damage, or miss with Rock Throw, which is only 65% accurate, just enough to survive until we knock them out. And using this method, we attempted this battle a total of 4 times, and only made it to the Graveler a single time, who then promptly knocks us out. So it was immediately clear that this game plan was not destined to work, and we had to come up with something else. Meanwhile, while we're making all these attempts, Scott easily defeats the next few trainers in Rock Tunnel, and then arrives in Celadon City, upon which he immediately heads over to the Rocket Hideout to pick up an extra rare candy and the TM for Double Edge, a 100 power normal move that inflicts recoil to the user equal to 1/4 of the damage dealt. However, Scott holds off on teaching the move just yet. Then up next, he completes his usual shopping errands in the department store, where he also buys a few Carbos to boost his Nidoran speed stat in the hopes that it will give him better chances at defeating the champion. And if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, I know what you're thinking. Don't your rules ban the use of store-bought vitamins? Well, yes, they do, but Scott just forgot about that. So it looks like we'll be suspending that rule for this run. Then, as usual, the decision now is either to face Erica or fly back to Lavender Town to face Rival 4. Well, here Scott opts for the latter, and in this battle, the rival Spearow has evolved into a much more formidable Fearow, who outspeeds and opens with a growl. Then Scott uses Thunderbolt, the TM for which he picked up from Lieutenant Surge, but even in spite of Fearow's type weakness, Nidoran's special stat is so poor that Fearow survives in the yellow, and then uses Mirror Move to Thunderbolt Nidoran and bring it to just over half health before fainting to the next Thunderbolt. Then, because of the growl from earlier, Body Slam takes a full 3 hits to take out the Magnemite, who gets an Tackle and a Sonic Boom before going down. Then Thunderbolt one-shots the Shellder, then Body Slam 3-shots Sandshrew while Sandshrew gets Nidoran down to red, and then finally Eevee gets priority with Quick Attack and forces Scott to reset. But fortunately in the next attempt, although each Pokemon still take the exact same number of hits to knock out, throughout the fight they also decide not to attack with quite as many damaging moves this time, so Scott still manages the victory. Then, upon Scott completing the Lavender Tower mission at just over half an hour, that was also around the time that I decided to change up my strategy against the hiker. And my plan is actually to take a page out of the book of our Ponyta run and level up to 36, at which point Nidoran learns Horn Drill, which is a 30% accurate one-hit KO move to use against the Graveler. And although you might be thinking it's unreliable to depend on such a move, realistically, if the battle itself has less than a 30% win rate, which the one against the Graveler obviously does, then Horn Drill is actually the most reliable method that we have available. So to level up, we knock out several of the optional trainers on Route 9 that we skipped earlier, then head back down to Vermilion City to defeat Lieutenant Surge, since we skipped him earlier as well. Then after making it to level 34, we use a couple rare candies to bring us up to level 36. Then try our hand at the hiker with this new strategy. Well, to start, we open by weakening the 2 Geodudes with Leer just like before, but it doesn't matter because they both just use Self Destruct anyway, which thanks to our now higher level we just barely survive. Then against Graveler, our first Horn Drill misses, then Graveler thankfully just uses Defense Curl, giving us another chance. Then the next Horn Drill lands for the victory, finally allowing us to move past him and make it to Celadon City at 43 minutes and 38 seconds. Now even further behind Scott than we were before, thanks to the hiker who widened the gap all the way to 17 minutes and 4 seconds. However, the entire time that we were attempting to get past the hiker, Scott was doing nothing but preemptive training against the trainers on Cycling Road and Silphco for lots of extra experience in preparation for Koga, since he speculated that Koga would be one of the toughest fights in the game. So we have our work cut out for us, but we still have a chance of catching up. So upon arriving in Celadon, we also complete our usual shopping errands, but unlike Scott, I decide to face Erica prior to the rival. So we head over to the Celadon gym and quickly knock out all the trainers there for experience, then face Erica herself. And needless to say, this fight is completely trivial thanks to our prior overleveling, and also thanks to Nidoran's type resistance against Erica's grass type attacks. So to start, Body Slam deals almost half to Victory Bell, then Victory Bell misses with Wrap, then the next Body Slam brings Victory Bell to red, prompting a Super Potion. Then, although the next Body Slam isn't quite enough, giving Victory Bell the chance to retaliate with a weak Wrap, the next Body Slam takes out the Victory Bell and we move on to Tangela, who is then 2-shot with Tangela failing to damage us at all. Then after Body Slam brings Vileplume into yellow, it does almost nothing with Mega Drain before going down in the next turn for a decisive victory. Then ironically, it turns out that after Scott completes his training, he too decides to go into the Celadon gym at almost exactly the same time that I do, but it's important to keep in mind that I still haven't caught up with him because he's completed the Lavender Tower mission where I have not. So anyway, against Erica, her team in yellow is different than in blue because she uses the middle evolutionary stage of her Pokemon instead of the final evolution, but they're also at a higher level. But in this case, it makes no no difference because Scott's prior overleveling and type advantage make this fight a piece of cake for him just like it was for me. And then for even more irony, after defeating Erica, Scott and I simultaneously head to face the next rival. But the rival that I'm up against is rival 4, whereas his is rival 5. And here it's at this point that the rivals' teams really start to diverge quite drastically between blue and yellow, because in my run we start by fighting Pidgeotto, who goes down to a single Thunderbolt, but then up next is Gyarados. And although Gyarados is one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, we're so overleveled that we still outspeed and one-shot it with a 4 times effective Thunderbolt. Then Growlithe and Kadabra's defenses are so weak that they're one-shot with Body Slam, and then Ivysaur is 2-shot with it getting off a Vine Whip that does almost nothing before going down. However, Scott's rival battle doesn't go quite as smoothly, because this rival opens with Sandslash, who has excellent defense, and therefore takes only about a quarter from Body Slam and then retaliates with a Swift to deal about a third. Then the next Body Slam does fortunately paralyze, but then after another brief exchange the Sandslash gets the win, after which Scott immediately realizes that he's out of his league and decides to traverse the Kanto map to train even more. Then he comes back 6 minutes and 3 levels later to try again, and it was at this point that Scott's frustration with this battle was clearly starting to set in. So Scott, much like me against the Hiker, decided to Horn Drill the Sandslash, but even in the one attempt in which Horn Drill landed against the Sandslash, even Thunderbolt didn't one-shot the Cloyster, allowing Cloyster to get Nidoran down to low enough health for Magneton to get the knockout. So Scott has no choice but to go out and train yet again. In the meantime, while Scott is trying to get past this brick wall, I wrap up the Lavender Tower mission, traverse Cycling Road down to Safari Zone where we pick up the vitamins, then head to Silphco to pick up the vitamins there, and also face Rival 5. And it's worth noting here that we're currently only a couple minutes behind Scott's most recent rival attempt. So if we manage to win this battle in a reasonable amount of time, it seems as if we may start gaining some ground against him. So now, just like in Scott's battle, Nidoran's poor special stat means that Thunderbolt isn't even enough to one-shot the Pokemon that's weak to it, and much like Scott's Gatekeeper with Sandslash, mine is Alakazam, because it will always outspeed and attack for super effective damage. So because of that, just like Scott, I decide to abandon the rival and head elsewhere, immediately after which Scott heads back to the rival to face him once more, this time at level 50.
Alright, enough. Let's try the rival again. Level 50. Okay. Alright, everyone, wish me luck. Come on, Horn Drill, come through. No, not like that. That's not what I needed. Okay, that's better. No accuracy lower this time. Okay, I one-shot the Cloyster. I think I need to hit this. Okay, Magneton missed. That's really good. Okay. Yes. Yes! No, 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 not like this. Come on. Sand attack. Are you kidding me? Okay. Oh, holy. Holy.
So fortunately for Scott in that last fight, he finally made it to a high enough level to outspeed the entire team, allowing him to Horn Drill the Sandslash, one-shot the Cloyster with Thunderbolt, two-shot the Magneton with Body Slam, one-shot the Kadabra with Body Slam, and finally power through the long string of sand attacks from Flareon to knock it out as well. So now, remember how earlier Scott decided to do so much extra training in preparation for Koga? Well, unlike Scott, I believe we have a reasonable chance against Koga without being so overleveled. So after quickly knocking out all the Fuchsia Gym trainers, we face against him next. And in this battle, since Koga's last Pokemon Weezing has such excellent defense, we already know in advance that Body Slam is not going to be enough. So our plan is to give him the Hiker treatment and knock it out with Horn Drill. However, that's much easier said than done because Koga also has 2 Coughings that can disrupt Horn Drill's already poor accuracy with Smokescreen. Well, to start, we deal just under half to the first Coughing with Body Slam, then Coughing deals just a blip with Tackle. Then our next Body Slam brings Coughing down to red and also paralyzes, then Coughing's next tackle misses, after which one more Body Slam takes it out. Then we continue to spam Body Slam against Muck, who goes down in 4 hits after getting off a failed Disable, followed by a couple Sludges that don't do much thanks to our type resistance. Then the next Coughing uses a Tackle that brings us down to yellow, and then, just what we were afraid of, it gets off a Smokescreen before our last Body Slam takes it out. So then against Weezing, our first Horn Drill misses, but luckily Koga just uses an X attack, giving us another chance at Horn Drill. But our next one misses as well, allowing Weezing to knock us out with Self Destruct. Then in the next attempt, we manage to take out the first Coughing in only 2 attacks thanks to a critical hit, and we go into Muck at full health. Then we take out Muck in only 3 attacks thanks to another critical hit, during which Muck disables Horn Drill and gets trapped in paralysis from Body Slam, meaning we go into the second Coughing at full health as well. Then against Coughing, our first Body Slam gets a Gen 1 miss, and Coughing does very little with Tackle. Then, even though we're able to knock it out with a few more Body Slams, Coughing just has to hit us with a Smokescreen before going down. And now against Weezing, fortunately the disable on Horn Drill has worn off, so we go for Horn Drill, and it spites the Smokescreen screen to knock out the Weezing on only our second attempt. And funny enough, it turns out that Scott and I at this point are totally neck and neck, because we've now both defeated the exact same number of boss trainers, and he and I even attempted Koga at the exact same time. So let's check in on Scott and see how his Koga battle went. Well, for starters, it's very important to note here that of all the boss trainers in the game, Koga's team is the one that is most different between Blue and Yellow, sharing exactly 0 common Pokemon between them. So in Yellow, Scott is up against a string of 3 Venonats followed by a Venomoth. But the catch is that Koga has what's called good AI, which prioritizes super effective moves, and will therefore have his Pokemon spam Psybeam, Psychic, or Leech Life against Nidoran to deal massive damage. So if Scott can't outspeed and one-shot Koga's team, he's going to have a very steep hill to climb. To start, it initially looks like Scott's training paid off, because he outspeeds the first Venonat to deal over half with Body Slam, then Venonat luckily only uses an X attack, ironically preventing it from attacking before going down to another Body Slam. So, off to a good start, but then after Scott uses Body Slam on the next higher level Venonat, it retaliates with Psychic to deal about a third before going down, and then the next even higher level Venonat deals even more with Psychic before going down. And then Nidoran still isn't high leveled enough to outspeed the Venomoth, so Venomoth takes priority, but luckily again just uses an X attack. Then Nidoran's Body Slam deals about a third, but then all it takes is one super effective Leech Life from Venomoth to knock out the Nidoran. So considering that Scott got very lucky in that fight with not just 1 but 2 useless X attacks, and was still nowhere close to winning, Scott decides to abandon Koga and yet again go out and train to a higher level with the goal of outspeeding the Venomoth. And to be honest, it was at this precise moment that Scott, myself, and everyone watching the live stream all recognized this is the inflection point in the run where I would start to pull ahead by a substantial margin. Because while Scott was busy frantically trying to find every last trainer across the Kanto map to defeat for experience, I head over to Self to face the rival. And if I manage to defeat Rival 5 here, it will be the first point in the run where I have defeated a greater number of boss trainers than Scott has. And what's more, the last several gym leaders in Yellow version have far better movesets than they do in Blue version. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how Scott handles navigating through Yellow's more challenging mid-game. But regardless, now that we've made it to the rival at a higher level this time, let's see if we can pull it off. To start, we 2-shot Pidgeot with Thunderbolt while Pidgeot just gets off a quick attack. Then amazingly, even despite us being a full 7 points over leveled, and Thunderbolt being 4 times effective against Gyarados, it still comes just shy of one-shotting. But thankfully the rival just uses a potion and Gyarados goes down on the next turn. Then Body Slam 2-shots Growlithe with it using a weak Ember, but then Alakazam of course outspeeds and knocks us out with Psybeam. Then in the next attempt, Alakazam just uses Confusion which deals less damage than Psybeam, after which Body Slam comes just shy of the knockout and also paralyzes. So luckily that means we now outspeed and knock it out on the next turn, but then Venusaur finishes us off with Razor Leaf. So because of those 2 consecutive losses, I decide to use 4 rare candies up to level 49 and try one more time. So this time Pidgeot is again 2-shot with Thunderbolt, but unlike before, Gyarados is now 1-shot, meaning we can knock out the Growlithe as well and make it to Alakazam at full health. And it turns out those rare candies made all the difference, because now we outspeed and 1-shot the Alakazam with Body Slam, and then finally Venusaur's grass-type attacks are no threat at all thanks to our type resistance, and 3 turns later Venusaur goes down, meaning that for the first time in the run, we've now surpassed Scott and taken the lead. Then, as Scott still continues to train to the point where he can outspeed Koga's Venomoth, we make our way down to Cinnabar Island where we use Body Slam to make quick work of the Cinnabar gym trainers, and then take on Blaine. And to kick off the battle, Blaine leads with Growlithe, whose good AI will always spam Agility because it's a Psychic type move against our Poison typing, allowing us to take it out completely for free. Then against Ponyta, Body Slam brings it into Yellow, then Blaine uses a Super Potion, then Body Slam brings it into Red and also paralyzes, then Ponyta uses a very weak Stomp before going down on the next turn. Then Body Slam brings Rapidash into Yellow, then Blaine uses a Super Potion, then Body Slam brings it into Yellow, then Blaine uses a Super Potion, then Body Slam brings it into Yellow and also paralyzes, then Rapidash also uses a weak Stomp before finally going down. Then against Arcanine, its superior defense means Body Slam only does about a quarter, then Arcanine brings us to half health with Ember. Then the next Body Slam paralyzes and prevents Arcanine from attacking. However, after the next Body Slam, Blaine uses yet another Super Potion, but then the next Body Slam crits, and even though Arcanine does retaliate with a critical hit Ember, it's still not enough before one final Body Slam takes it out. Now by this point, Scott has finally leveled up to the point where he outspeeds Koga's Venonats and speed ties the Venomoth. So in the hopes that that will be enough, he tries Koga yet again. In the battle, the first Venonat survives Body Slam in the Yellow and retaliates with Psychic to deal about a quarter. Then luckily the next Venonat is trapped in Paralysis, preventing it from attacking before Body Slam 2 shots, but then the third Venonat brings Nidoran to half health with another Psychic before going down. And even though Nidoran wins the speed tie against Venomoth to bring it to half health with Body Slam, one more Psychic from Venomoth is more than enough to get the knockout. So, Scott decides to go out and train just a little bit further, this time climb not even to the next level, but rather just enough that he will level up prior to the Venomoth to be guaranteed to outspeed it. And even though in the first attempt at this higher experience, the first Venonat's Psychic lowers his special, causing him to take too much damage and allowing Venomoth to knock him out, in the second attempt, he two-shots all of the Venonats with Body Slam, all of whom use a single Psychic before going down. Then against Venomoth, he opens with Body Slam to deal about half. Then, even though Venomoth could knock him out with Psychic, it instead just goes for Leech Life to bring him into red, after which one more Body Slam finally knocks out the Venomoth and earns Scott the Soul Badge after what must have felt like an eternity. So now, much like my Brock split from earlier, Scott's Nidoran is now at a much higher level than mine, which could potentially allow him to play through the next part of the game much faster and catch up to me. Let's see if he can do it. First, at just a couple minutes behind me, he takes on Blaine. But unlike in Blue version, in Yellow version Blaine's Pokemon have much more threatening movesets, and the quirk of Blaine's AI where sometimes he just spams Super Potions has been removed. So to start, Blaine opens with Ninetales and Nidoran's Body Slam doesn't even deal half. Then Ninetales confuses with Confuse Ray. Then after Nidoran hits itself in confusion once, a couple more Body Slams manage to take out the Ninetales, with Ninetales only getting off a single quick attack before going down. Then against Rapidash, Body Slam brings it to about half. Then Rapidash misses with Fire Spin. Then the next Body Slam leaves it hanging on by a thread, and then Rapidash deals massive damage with Takedown, and then feints to its own recoil. And finally against Arcanine, Body Slam only does about a quarter, and then even less after Arcanine sets up Reflect, after which one more Flamethrower from Arcanine gets the knockout. See, I told you their moves were better. Could you imagine if the team that I faced had Confuse Ray and Flamethrower instead of Agility and Ember? Then in the next attempt, Ninetales sets out to demonstrate how poor Nidoran's special stat is by opening with Flamethrower to bring Nidoran down to red in the first turn. And although Nidoran does eventually take it out, Rapidash finishes Nidoran with Stomp. So after that loss, Scott decides to teach his Nidoran Reflect, the TM for which he picked up in the Celadon department store, to hopefully brace the onslaught more effectively and try again. But in the next attempt, Ninetales opens with a Flamethrower that inflicts a burn, cutting Nidoran's attack stat in half and essentially crushing any hope of winning for this attempt. So in an act of desperation, Scott goes for Horn Drill on Ninetales, which lands and knocks it out. But then because of the burn, Scott can only deal tiny chip damage to Rapidash, who after a long exchange gets the knockout for yet another loss. Then in the next attempt, Scott does make it to Arcanine and tries for a couple Horn Drills, but neither of them connect and Arcanine takes him out. But then finally in attempt number 5, Scott gets perfect luck against the Ninetales, who just goes for a failed Tail Whip and then gets trapped in paralysis twice in a row, allowing Scott to go into Rapidash at full health. Then Rapidash opens with Takedown, which doesn't do much thanks to Scott setting up his Reflect against the Ninetales. Then Body Slam deals almost half to Rapidash. Then Rapidash growls to lower Nidoran's attack but also badge boost its speed, allowing 2 more Body Slams to knock out the Rapidash. And then the RNG gods decide to show Scott some mercy with a Horn Drill that connects on Arcanine for the knockout to finally get past Blaine. And now, at the same time that Scott was fighting Blaine, I head over to the Saffron Gym to knock out the gym trainers there and then face Sabrina. And the hope in this fight is that we'll be so overleveled that we deal enough damage with Body Slam to overcome our weakness to Sabrina's super effective Psychic type attacks. So, let's see if that strategy pans out. Well, to start, Kadabra is outsped in one shot. I mean, I would hope so, we are 16 points overleveled, followed by Mr. Mime who is 2-shot without dealing any damage. Then Body Slam deals about 2/3 to Venomoth who retaliates with Psybeam to deal about a quarter and also confuse us. And although on the next turn Venomoth is trapped in paralysis from Body Slam, confusion damage brings us to half health before we take out the Venomoth on the next turn. Then, even despite our enormous level difference, Alakazam still outspeeds and opens with Psybeam. Then, although Body Slam brings it into yellow, another Psybeam is still enough to knock us out. But then in the next attempt, we again get past Kadabra and Mr. Mime at full health. Then Venomoth gets us down to yellow with a critical hit Psybeam. Then luckily against Alakazam, after it uses Psywave, our Body Slam paralyzes, allowing us to outspeed and knock it out on the next turn, meaning that for now we retain our one boss trainer lead over Scott. But again, only a couple minutes behind me, Scott makes his way over to Sabrina. And in this fight, an important difference to recognize between Blue and Yellow is that in Blue version, Sabrina's Pokemon are at a lower level but have good AI, whereas in Yellow, her Pokemon are at a higher level but attack randomly, so the Yellow fight tends to be more luck-based. But it turns out that in this fight, Scott doesn't have to worry about luck against the Abra or the Kadabra because he outspeeds and one-shots them both. Then, as if to make up for his awful experience against Blaine, Sabrina sends out Alakazam who just spams Reflect over and over again, with the exception of a single Psywave which only does about a quarter before Body Slam eventually eventually knocks it out as well. But then, only 1 minute after Scott's defeat of Sabrina do I take on Giovanni, who poses no real threat because in blue version, his team's movesets are just horrible, with the one possible exception of Dig from Dugtrio. And before making this video, Scott and I were actually talking about why it might be that so many of the trainer's Pokemon have such terrible moves, and the conclusion that we reached is that in the early days of Pokemon, each Pokemon's level up moveset was more based in capturing the overall flavor of the Pokemon rather than balancing its power level. Additionally, the game developers really wanted to push the use of TMs as an integral part of the gameplay experience. So as a result of all that, the developers way over-prioritized normal moves, leaving many Pokemon in the Kanto roster such as Butterfree, Voltorb, and Pinsir just to name a few, learning 0 same-type attack bonus moves by level up, which is how you end up with gym leaders like Giovanni with a Pokemon like Rhyhorn whose most powerful move is Stomp. So because of that, our battle against Giovanni is totally trivial, and although I misclick and go for Horn Drill against the initial Rhyhorn, on the next turn we take it out with 2 double kicks, and from there, all we have to do is spam Body Slam to whittle away at Dugtrio, Nidoqueen, and Nidoking as they all go down one by one. Then Rhydon is literally a free win because its AI will cause it to spam Fissure, which is a move that can't hit a Pokemon that outspeeds, which we do. So now, all we have to do is spam double kick until Rhydon goes down. But then, at the exact same moment that I defeat Giovanni, does Scott take on Giovanni. But the difference here is that in yellow version, his team's movesets are far superior than in blue version. For example, in yellow, every one of Giovanni's Pokemon except Persian know Earthquake, which will obviously one-shot Nidoran if it connects. So to prepare, Scott feeds 7 of his rare candies to Nidoran to level up to 66, and he also teaches his Nidoran the TM for Blizzard, which he picked up from the Pokemon Mansion. And in the battle, he's over-leveled enough that he can outspeed and one-shot the opening Dugtrio with Body Slam before it can use Earthquake. Then he two-shots the Persian with Giovanni just using a guard spec, after which Blizzard one-shots Nidoqueen, but then Blizzard isn't quite enough to one-shot Nidoking, who knocks out Nidoran with Earthquake. Then in the next attempt, to prepare for Earthquake, Scott decides this time to set up Reflect against Persian, but that comes back to bite him because Persian uses Double Team several times and prevents Scott from landing the finishing blow, allowing Persian to get him down to yellow health before going down, in turn allowing Nidoking's Earthquake to knock him out even in spite of the Reflect. But then in the next attempt, Scott uses the same strategy, but isn't punished for it this time because the Persian doesn't use Double Team and leaves Scott in high green health going into Nidoking, who only deals about half damage with Earthquake thanks to Reflect, after which it goes down to a couple Blizzards. And then finally Rhydon, even though it too knows Earthquake, is outsped in one shot with Blizzard for the win. So as of now, Scott still just barely trails behind me as I take on Rival 6. But it turns out that this rival actually presents a huge problem, because although the first Pidgeot is a free win because its good AI will cause it to spam Agility, and then Rhyhorn's moves are so terrible that it's not a threat either, then we consistently outspeed and one-shot Gyarados with Thunderbolt, and then Growlithe will also spam Agility for the same reason as Pidgeot. When we finally get to the Alakazam, it outspeeds, and even though its Psybeam is not lethal, neither is our Body Slam, meaning that it can consistently knock us out on the next turn. And indeed, we attempted this fight 2 more times and were brought to the same fate both times. So at this point, I bite the bullet and head over to the Pokemon Mansion to train up a bit more, during which time Scott heads to face his rival. And now it's here that Scott is rewarded for all his prior training, because the opening Sandslash is outsped in one shot with Blizzard, as is Execute, then Cloyster goes down to a Thunderbolt, then Magneton is 2-shot with Body Slam, then Kadabra is 1-shot with Body Slam, and then finally Nidoran uses Body Slam against Flareon, then Flareon retaliates with a Flamethrower that leaves Scott surviving in the green, after which one more Body Slam takes it out for a decisive first try victory, meaning that Scott once again takes the lead and makes his way through Victory Road to the Elite Four while I'm still on my training regimen. So, as I train up my Nidoran in preparation for the rival, let's see how Scott handles the Elite Four. Well, first up on the roster is Lorelei, and to start, the opening Dugong is a free win because it will always spam Rest, meaning that all Scott has to do is spam Thunderbolt until it goes down. Then Cloyster is almost one-shot with Thunderbolt, then Lorelei just uses a Super Potion before Cloyster goes down. But now Slowbro is the really scary part of this fight, because its AI will cause it to use either Amnesia, which is not threatening, or Psychic, which obviously is. So the strategy here is for Scott to use Mimic to copy Amnesia to boost his special stat, and luckily during that setup, Slowbro only uses a single non-lethal Psychic, after which, thanks to Amnesia, Slowbro, Jinx, and Lapras are all one-shot. Then, at the exact same time that Scott defeats Lorelei, I wrap up my training and make my next attempt at Rival 6. And of course, the first 4 Pokemon are just as free as they were before, meaning we can go into Alakazam at full health. And unfortunately, in spite of our higher level, we still don't outspeed, but this time Alakazam just opens with Reflect, meaning that it doesn't deal any damage, but also meaning it will require more hits to knock it out. So then our first Body Slam deals about a third and also gets a Clutch Paralysis, allowing us to outspeed on the next turn and also get a Clutch critical hit to bypass the Reflect and go into Venusaur for the first time. And now, as usual, Venusaur's Grass typing poses no threat against our Poison type typing, and we just spam Body Slam until we get the knockout for the win. And now, at the same time that I was fighting the rival, Scott was fighting Bruno, who you probably guessed is as trivial as he always is, because Scott just uses Blizzard against the 2 Onyxes, and Body Slam against everything else to go into Machamp at full health. And even though Machamp does at one point get off a Karate Chop to deal about a third, Scott was never in any danger of losing that fight, and he moves on to Agatha. But before I show you the battle against Agatha, I first want to discuss how Scott's strategy against Agatha works, because the strategy that he uses is one that you've never seen on my channel, because it's unique to Pokemon Yellow. Reason being that Agatha's team has all the same Pokemon between Blue and Yellow, but with very different movesets that require a very different plan of attack. So in this fight, Scott's strategy is to mimic the opening Gengar Substitute, which is a move that, at the cost of a quarter of the user's total HP, makes it so that the user can't be damaged by moves that would otherwise deal a quarter damage or less. And if the user is hit with a move that would deal more than a quarter, the user still doesn't take any damage, but the substitute breaks. And it turns out that this is a perfect counter to the opening Gengar's moveset of Substitute, Confuse Ray, Mega Drain, and Lick, none of which can deal enough damage to Nidoran to break the Substitute. And yes, Substitute even absorbs the self-inflicted confusion damage in the event that Gengar uses Confuse Ray. And incidentally, it also absorbs the poison damage from Toxic, but that doesn't actually matter in this case, since Nidoran can't actually be poisoned. So, with that explanation out of the way, let's see how Scott fares against Agatha. To start, Nidoran is so overleveled that it actually outspeeds the opening Gengar, and Scott mimics Substitute as planned, after which Gengar opens with a Mega Drain that only does a blip thanks to Nidoran's type resistance. Then Scott sets up the Substitute, then Gengar goes for a failed Confuse Ray, but as I mentioned before, it wouldn't have actually mattered if the Confuse Ray landed, because Nidoran would never take any confusion damage anyway. And indeed, after Scott finishes setting up, he spams Blizzard while Gengar continues to be completely ineffective. And after a couple Blizzards, Gengar becomes frozen and Scott finishes it off with a Thunderbolt. Then Golbat is also a free win, because it too does not know a single move that can break Nidoran's Substitute, so all Scott has to do is spam Thunderbolt until Golbat goes down. However, up next is the first of Agatha's Pokemon that actually poses a serious threat even in spite of the Substitute, because Haunter knows both Hypnosis and Dream Eater, which is a super effective move that will break the Substitute if it hits once, and get the knockout if it hits twice. However, since Agatha's AI attacks randomly, that exact sequence is not actually that likely to happen. So first, Scott goes for Blizzard, which misses, then Haunter uses a failed Confuse Ray. Then the next Blizzard brings Haunter down to red, then Haunter uses Dream Eater, which fortunately for Scott has no effect unless the opponent is asleep. Then Haunter goes down to another Thunderbolt, so it looks like Agatha's random AI paid off in this case. But then against Arbok, the Agatha lottery is not so kind, because after Nidoran's Thunderbolt brings Arbok to about half, Arbok retaliates with a Glare to paralyze Nidoran. Then because of Nidoran's lowered speed, Arbok outspeeds and uses Screech. Then the next Thunderbolt brings Arbok down to red and also paralyzes, allowing Nidoran to attack first in the next turn for the knockout. So it's definitely a good thing that Nidoran's paralysis never prevented it from attacking, but now the final Gengar is where Scott's luck runs out, because unlike the previous Gengar, this Gengar knows Psychic, which can break the Substitute. And indeed, that's exactly what happens on turn 1 of the fight, after which Nidoran uses Blizzard to deal about a quarter. Then, sensing Nidoran's vulnerability, Gengar lands Confuse Ray, but then luckily Nidoran spites both the confusion and the paralysis to set up another Substitute, bringing it down to half health. Then, as if the universe were just taunting Scott, Nidoran and Gengar just stare at each other for a while, because Gengar just goes for a useless Dream Eater, then Nidoran is confused to prevent it from attacking, but the Substitute absorbs the damage. Then Gengar uses a failed Confuse Ray, then Nidoran is again confused. Then Gengar uses yet another failed Confuse Ray, and Nidoran is trapped in paralysis. Then, you guessed it, another failed Confuse Ray, then Nidoran actually attacks this time with Blizzard, but it misses. Then finally some action happens when Gengar breaks the Substitute with Psychic, and Nidoran retaliates with Blizzard to bring Gengar into orange. However, with Substitute broken, Gengar seizes its opportunity and knocks out Nidoran with Psychic. Then in the next attempt, Gengar and Golbat are again virtually free wins, since neither of them have any moves that can break the Substitute, and Haunter takes a page from its previous battle by again using Dream Eater while Nidoran is awake, not once but twice before going down. However, starting with Arbok is where this battle becomes much less certain, because Body Slam doesn't quite two-shot the Arbok, after which it goes for Acid to break Nidoran's Substitute. So, to play it safe, Scott uses Substitute again, and then Agatha heals Arbok with a Super Potion before another Body Slam takes it down. Then against the final Gengar, it goes for the worst of all possible sequences of attacks, because Psychic breaks the Substitute, and then another Psychic gets the knockout. And then Scott goes on to attempt this fight many more times, each time getting past the first 3 Pokemon in the form of Gengar, Golbat, and Haunter with ease, but then in every attempt, some combination of glares to paralyze Nidoran and prevent it from attacking, coupled with Psychic to break the Substitute and get the knockout, are just enough to stop Scott in his tracks. And to make matters worse for Scott, this particular strategy is extremely time-consuming, because the enemy Pokemon require so many attacks to knock out, and all the threatening remaining Pokemon are at the end of the battle instead of at the beginning. So because of that, every reset adds well over a full minute to Scott's time, meaning that while he's busy making all these attempts, that gives me some opportunity to catch up. So as Scott began his first attempt at Agatha, it was around that time that I had wrapped up my battle against Rival 6. But before heading to the Elite Four, we now have a few errands to run, because I still have to poke my head inside the Rocket Hideout to grab a rare candy, then surf all the way to the power plant to grab a rare candy there, as well as head to Saffron City to pick up the TM for Mimic in preparation for a couple of the Elite Four battles. Then after that, we make our way through Victory Road, and when we finally arrive at the Pokemon League a full 7 minutes after defeating the rival, Scott begins to worry about his prospects of winning this race because he's still stuck attempting Agatha. So if Agatha continues to be such a brick wall, it's entirely possible that I could surpass him. However, Scott's worries are soon quelled because right at that moment, he gets a run where he finally manages to avoid either Acid or Glare from Arbok. Then after the final Gengar opens with a failed Confuse Ray, Nidoran's Blizzard gets its 10% chance to freeze. And since in Gen 1 a Pokemon has no chance to thaw unless it's hit with a fire move, all Scott has to do is keep attacking and patiently wait until Gengar eventually goes down, meaning that he can finally move on to Lance. And just like Agatha, Lance has all the same Pokemon in Yellow as he does in Blue, but again with very different movesets. The most important of which is that in Blue version, Lance's AI will cause his 2 Dragonairs and his Dragonite to spam either Agility or Barrier for the exact same reason as Growlithe and Pidgeot, making them a free win. But in Yellow, they don't have Agility or Barrier, and instead just have a whole host of some of the most powerful attacking moves in the game, such as Ice Beam, Fire Blast, and Thunder, in addition to the usual suspects of Hydro Pump and Hyper Beam. So, let's see how Scott handles this challenge. To start, Nidoran is so overleveled that it outspeeds the opening Gyarados, but then Nidoran's poor special again means that Gyarados survives Thunderbolt in the red. But then luckily, Lance heals Gyarados with a Hyper Potion, and then the next Thunderbolt knocks it out, indicating that the first attack was a range. Then since Nidoran outsped Gyarados, it will obviously outspeed the first Dragonair, who was one-shot with the super effective Blizzard, as is the second Dragonair. Then Aerodactyl outspeeds and deals about half with Hyper Beam, but then Aerodactyl also faints to a single Blizzard. And then finally out comes Dragonite. And here, if Dragonite outspeeds, it will knock out Nidoran. But if Nidoran outspeeds, Scott will be able to move on to the champion. So does Nidoran outspeed? Yes it does, and Dragonite goes down to a 4 times effective Blizzard for the win, which is honestly really incredible considering that Scott and I both predicted that Lance's more powerful moveset in Yellow compared to Blue would make that particular fight much more challenging for him than it was for me. But nope, Scott's prior training in the mid-game really paid off. And now, as Scott heads into the champion, I make my first attempt at Lorelei. And just like in Yellow version, Dewgong is again a free win because it will always spam Rest, meaning we just have to keep spamming Thunderbolt until it goes down. However, because of our poor special, Thunderbolt doesn't quite one-shot Cloyster, who retaliates with a Supersonic to confuse us. Then we get hit with confusion damage plus a Spike Cannon to bring us to about 2/3 health before the next Thunderbolt takes out the Cloyster. Then, unlike in Yellow version, in Blue version Slowbro is also a free win because it doesn't know the move Psychic and will therefore always spam Amnesia. So, a few Thunderbolts later and Slowbro goes down. But unfortunately we do hit ourselves in confusion one more time before going into Jinx. Then Body Slam 2-shots Jinx with it using a Thrash to bring us to about a quarter going into Lapras, and although Lapras is slow enough that we do outspeed, it also has good enough special that Thunderbolt doesn't even deal half, after which Lapras goes for Body Slam to bring us into red. Then our next Thunderbolt is obviously not enough, and one more Blizzard from Lapras knocks us out. But now, before showing you the next attempt, since Scott went into the champion at the exact same time as I went into Lorelei, let's check in on Scott and see how he holds up. To start, he decides to open by mimicking Sandslash's Earthquake, presumably because he predicts that Body Slam won't be enough to knock out the Alakazam or the Arcanine, and he needs a more powerful physical move to get the job done. However, that allows Sandslash the opportunity to retaliate with a devastating super effective Earthquake of its own. And while yes, Sandslash does go down to a single Blizzard, that only leaves Nidoran with a quarter HP going into Alakazam. And even in spite of the enormous level gap, Alakazam still outspeeds, which means the writing is on the wall and Psybeam gets the knockout. Then in the second attempt, Scott learns from his mistake and knocks out the Sandslash with Blizzard on the first turn. But still, Alakazam's critical hit super effective Psybeam is obviously more than enough. So now, it was definitely at this point that Scott and I both realized just how steep of a hill he has to climb in this last battle. Because the fact that he doesn't outspeed the Alakazam means that he will have to find some clever way of knocking out the Alakazam while still having enough HP to make it through the entire rest of the team as well. But now, it was at this same time that I made my second attempt at Lorelei, before which I decided to feed our remaining 6 rare candies to hopefully make Lapras a 2-shot instead of a 3-shot. Well, this time, again we take out the Dewgong for free, and then although we still don't quite one-shot the Cloyster, the first Thunderbolt still puts it in Super Potion range, and it goes down in the next turn. Then again, Slowbro is free, and Jinx is 2-shot with it getting off a Thrash just like it did last time. But now against Lapras, our opening Thunderbolt still doesn't quite do half damage, but fortunately the fact that we went into Lapras at higher health this time means means we can tank the Lapras's next 2 attacks while 2 more Thunderbolts get the job done. Then as we finish Lorelei, Scott continues to hack away at the champion, so once again, let's check in with him. In this battle, Scott has no choice but to take out Sandslash on the first turn, and then Alakazam doesn't actually attack but instead uses Kinesis to lower Nidoran's accuracy. Then Body Slam brings Alakazam to red and also paralyzes, allowing Nidoran to move first on the next turn, but then Kinesis comes back to bite him because the next Body Slam misses and Alakazam gets the knockout with a critical hit Psychic. Sorry Scott, just keep working at it until you get there. Then it was at that moment that I had to face Bruno. Now, in the entire history of this channel, I have yet to play a Pokemon that struggled to get past Bruno, and spoiler alert, this battle is no exception, because the opening Onix's 3-shot with Double Kick, while it deals about 10% damage with Rage, then Hitmonchan's special is so poor that it deals another 10% damage with Thunder Punch before being 2-shot with Thunderbolt. Then Hitmonlee doesn't attack and instead just uses Focus Energy before being 2-shot. Then, although I misclick against Onix and use Body Slam a couple times, Onix still only brings us to about 3/4 health before a few more double kicks take it out. And finally, since we're out of Thunderbolts, we have to spam Body Slam against Machamp, who just insists on not dealing any damage until the last turn, during which it uses Submission to take itself out with its own recoil. Well done, Bruno. You make the Elite Four proud. So now, how is Scott's long series of attempts against the champion going? Well, eventually after being knocked out many times, he opts for a different strategy of replacing Mimic with Rest. That way, in the unlikely event that he makes it past the Alakazam, he can use one of the opponent's weaker Pokemon to heal back up to full. So in this battle, after making it past the Sandslash, Nidoran just barely survives the Alakazam's Psychic, after which Body Slam paralyzes and allows Nidoran to knock it out on the next turn. Then out comes Exeggutor, and since its only damaging moves are Barrage and Stomp, Scott uses this as his opportunity to use Rest, during which time Exeggutor brings Nidoran to about 3/4 health before waking up. Then Scott goes for Blizzard to deal about 1/3, but then Exeggutor puts Nidoran to sleep with Hypnosis. Then, although Nidoran wakes up right away and manages another Blizzard, Exeggutor then lands yet another Hypnosis, and Nidoran stays asleep for the rest of the battle until Exeggutor gets the knockout. It is worth noting here, by the way, that Exeggutor's good II will cause it to spam Hypnosis, but only if the Nidoran isn't already asleep. So against Exeggutor, Scott has to be careful to time exactly when he uses Blizzard versus Rest very precisely to play around that. But then, after a couple more failed attempts, Scott decides to change up his game plan yet again, and this time go into the battle with both Mimic and Rest, with the intention of mimicking Exeggutor's Hypnosis, and then using Rest to set up for the second half of the fight. And luckily this time, Alakazam opens with Kinesis, which both lowers Nidoran's accuracy, but also badge boosted speed to allow it to outspeed the Alakazam, knock it out on the next turn, and go into Exeggutor at full health. Then Scott starts out with the best luck ever, because after he mimics Hypnosis, Exeggutor's Hypnosis misses and then Nidoran's Hypnosis lands, even in spite of the Kinesis from earlier. But then Scott's luck takes a dramatic turn for the worse, because he misses Blizzard, then Exeggutor wakes up and promptly puts Nidoran to sleep, and chips down its health with Barrage and Stomp. Then, although Nidoran does wake up and heal with Rest, Nidoran still doesn't land another Hypnosis for the rest of the battle, and Exeggutor puts Nidoran back to sleep and knocks it out after another long series of attacks. So now, as Scott continues to face the reality of one demoralizing loss after another, let's see how I handle Agatha. Well, to start, I decide to replace Horndrill and Double Kick with Blizzard and Mimic, because although this Gengar doesn't have Substitute like it did in Yellow, it does have Hypnosis, which will hopefully allow us to avoid any of Agatha's sleep and confusion shenanigans while we whittle away at her team. So first, we do outspeed Gengar and mimic its Hypnosis, and then Gengar retaliates with Nightshade to deal about 1/4. Then we put Gengar to sleep with Hypnosis, after which Agatha switches out to Golbat. And against Golbat, I wasn't sure if Thunderbolt would one-shot, so I debated using either Thunderbolt or Hypnosis, but eventually settled on Thunderbolt, which does indeed one-shot thanks to a critical hit. Then thankfully when Gengar comes back out, it stays asleep while a long series of Blizzards and Thunderbolts eventually take it down. And now, since this next part of the fight is frankly hilarious, I'll turn it over to my live reaction for the rest of the battle. Oh my gosh, their special is so good! How is their special that good? Stay asleep, Hunter. 4 times in a row I hit Hypnosis and it woke up. 4 times. And it didn't affect Arbok, of course. Come on. Keep not attacking. I'm fine with that. Keep not attacking. Keep not... Oh, yes, yes. One more. One more. Just use like a useless Dream Eater or Hypnosis Mist or something. Toxic? Yes! Oh! Agatha spent like 10 turns not attacking and allowed me to win. Oh my god. So fortunately in that fight, Agatha set out to demonstrate why people call it the Agatha Lottery, because sometimes she can completely disrupt your entire game plan with Sleep and Confusion, and other times you get battles that look like that, where she makes poor decisions the entire time and just hands you the win. Alright Scott, you hanging in there? Well, to be honest, not really, because Scott actually has quite a predicament on his hands, which is that although Scott can reliably get past the Sandslash, getting past the Alakazam requires both that Alakazam doesn't crit, and that Nidoran either gets a critical hit or paralysis on the Body Slam, or a speed badge boost from Kinesis, which, although not impossible, is worse than a coin flip. In this particular battle, for example, he crits the Alakazam, but even then, since Exeggutor is guaranteed to spam Hypnosis until Nidoran falls asleep, and then spam Barrage or Stomp, surviving that onslaught while also trying to take out the Exeggutor is also extremely unlikely, even with utilizing both Mimic and Rest. And in fact, as we make our way into the Lance battle, Scott still has yet to make it past the Exeggutor in all of his attempts at the champion so far. So let's see how our Lance battle goes down. To start, just like Scott, we're so overleveled that we outspeed the Gyarados, but then Thunderbolt comes just shy of a one-shot, then fortunately Gyarados just leers, allowing the next Thunderbolt to knock it out. Then, just like I mentioned before, both the Dragonairs are a free win for Nidoran, meaning we get to move on to Aerodactyl at full health, and since all it does is about half damage with Bite before being one-shot with Blizzard, that means we've essentially won because Dragonite can't actually do anything, and indeed Dragonite goes down in the next turn. So now, it all comes down to this. 10 minutes ago at 1:40 on the real-time clock, we began the Elite Four with Lorelei at the exact same time that Scott made his first attempt at the champion, and now after all this time, I've finally caught up with him, which means that from now until the end of the run, Scott and I will be destined to spend the entire rest of our time facing the champion simultaneously until one of us comes out victorious. Who will it be? Let's find out. The time is 1:50:14, and our first opponent is Pidgeot. First, we outspeed and go for Blizzard, which brings Pidgeot down to red, and then Pidgeot begins glowing in preparation for Sky Attack, and then gets taken out with Thunderbolt. Then, just like Scott, our second opponent is Alakazam, but this Alakazam has a slightly different moveset, as we see here when it opens with Reflect, causing our Body Slam to only deal about a third. Then Psychic brings us all the way down to a measly 2 hit points, and then our next Body Slam paralyzes, allowing us to outspeed and knock out the Alakazam in the next turn. Then instead of Exeggutor, our next opponent is Rhydon, but unlike Exeggutor, Rhydon's special stat is so paper thin that Blizzard easily knocks it out. And then just like with Lance, Thunderbolt yet again comes just shy of one-shotting the Gyarados, but also just like with Lance, luckily Gyarados just leers and then goes down in the next turn. And in this case, the leer is actually great news because it badge boosts our speed, allowing us to outspeed the Arcanine and deal about half damage with a critical hit Body Slam that also paralyzes. Then Arcanine breaks through the paralysis, but just goes for a useless roar. You're kidding me, right? We're not actually gonna win this on the first attempt, are we? Well, not quite, because then the champion goes for a full restore on the Arcanine, and after our next Body Slam, Arcanine knocks us out with Takedown. Okay, so even though we lost that fight, we did learn quite a lot from that experience regarding the ranges for our attacks and what sequences of events will need to happen in order for us to win the battle. Now back to Scott. The time is 1:50:24. He knocks out the Sandslash as usual, then Alakazam goes for Psybeam to deal about 2/3, then he uses Body Slam to bring Alakazam to red, then Alakazam uses Kinesis to badge boost Nidoran, so it outspeeds and gets the knockout. Then Nidoran misses Blizzard against Exeggutor, and Exeggutor puts Nidoran to sleep, but Nidoran wakes up right away. Then the next Blizzard lands and deals over half thanks to the badge boosted special, and Exeggutor misses Hypnosis. Then after both Pokemon miss their next attacks, Nidoran lands another Blizzard to knock out the Exeggutor and move on to Magneton for the first time in the run. Against Magneton, Nidoran's first Body Slam deals half and also paralyzes, and Magneton deals very little with Swift. Then both Nidoran's and Magneton's next 2 attacks miss yet again, so it looks like Nidoran is fond of staring contest in this battle, after which the next Body Slam takes it out. Then against Cloyster, Scott goes for Thunderbolt, and Cloyster hangs on by a thread to knock out Nidoran with Clamp. Now back to me. The time is 1:51:40, and we've now taught Double Edge in place of Mimic, the hope being that it will be strong enough to 2-shot the Alakazam even if it uses Reflect, and 1-shot the Alakazam without Reflect. To start against Pidgeot, Thunderbolt is a 2-shot without us taking any damage. Then Alakazam goes for Reflect, and unfortunately Double Edge is still just shy of dealing half. But then luckily Alakazam just goes for another Reflect, and Double Edge brings it down to red. Then after yet another Reflect, Body Slam takes it out. Then as usual, Blizzard takes care of Rhydon, but then Thunderbolt is again just shy of knocking out the Gyarados, and it knocks us out with a critical hit Hyper Beam. Now back to Scott. The time is 1:51:24, and his next couple of attempts end abruptly with Alakazam. Now Scott again. The time is 1:52:43. Sandslash goes down, Alakazam opens with Kinesis and is 1-shot with Body Slam. Blizzard then spites the Kinesis and 2-shots Exeggutor with a failed Hypnosis. Then up next is Magneton. Body Slam brings it to half, and Magneton uses Swift. Then Body Slam misses, and Magneton uses another Swift. Then Body Slam connects, and Magneton survives on a sliver and then heals with a full restore. Then Body Slam misses, and Magneton paralyzes with Thunder Wave. Then Magneton uses Thunderbolt, and Nidoran is trapped in paralysis yet again. Then Swift from Magneton, then Body Slam from Nidoran. Alright, now both Pokemon are in the red. Magneton uses Screech, and Nidoran's Body Slam finishes it off. Out comes Cloyster. It outspeeds, goes for Clamp, it misses, and then Nidoran breaks through the paralysis and heals to full with Rest. Then as Nidoran sleeps, Cloyster brings it to red with Spike Cannon followed by Ice Beam. And even though Nidoran does then wake up, since in Gen 1 you can't attack on the same turn, Cloyster then takes out Nidoran with another Ice Beam. Now back to me. The time is 1:52:43. Thunderbolt crits and one-shots Pidgeot. Alakazam reflects, and then we bypass the reflect with a critical hit double edge that one-shots. Yes, that is exactly the kind of result that we need. Then Blizzard one-shots Rhydon. Then after Thunderbolt on Gyarados, it leers to drop our defense, but also badge boost our other stats. Then the next Thunderbolt gets a Gen 1 miss, but then thankfully the champion uses a full restore. And now, thanks to our badge boosted special, the next Thunderbolt gets the knockout. Then against Arcanine we again outspeed thanks to our badge boost, and we use double edge to bring it to just over half. Then Arcanine roars. Then the next double edge brings Arcanine to low yellow, and Arcanine misses takedown. Then one more Body Slam finishes it off. Then Blizzard brings Venusaur to just under half, and to demonstrate precisely why I had the rival choose Bulbasaur, Venusaur goes for Mega Drain, which does very little thanks to our type resistance, and then although our next Blizzard misses, we again resist Venusaur's Razor Leaf and take it out on the next turn, making us champion of the Pokemon League. But it's not time to celebrate yet, because we still have to cheer on Scott as he continues to grind his way through this mountain of a battle. So, at 1 hour 54:50, he changes up his strategy and teaches Nidoran Double Edge for the first time. And after getting past Sandslash, Alakazam outspeeds with Psychic, which Nidoran survives. But more importantly, the Psychic gets a Super Clutch special drop, which is fantastic because it badge boosts all of Nidoran's other stats, allowing Double Edge to one-shot Alakazam and survive the recoil at just 8 health. Then against Exeggutor, Scott heals back up to full with Rest, and luckily Exeggutor misses all of its attacks in the next several turns, meaning that Nidoran wakes up with full health as well. Then Nidoran's Blizzard only does about a third because of its lowered special, and then Exeggutor's Hypnosis misses. Then after the next Blizzard, Hypnosis lands and puts Nidoran to sleep, after which Exeggutor chips away with Barrage and Stomp, which doesn't do much thanks to the badge boosted defense. Then after Nidoran wakes up, it mimics Hypnosis, after which one more Blizzard gets the knockout. Then, for fear of being paralyzed with Thunder Wave, Nidoran puts Magneton to sleep and then uses Blizzard, which again doesn't do much because of the lowered special. But then in the next turn, Scott switches to Double Edge, which deals a lot more damage, and then one more Blizzard knocks out the Magneton. Then out comes Cloyster, and Scott wastes no time immediately putting it to sleep, after which he uses 2 Double Edges. Then Cloyster wakes up, and unfortunately Nidoran's next Hypnosis misses, allowing Cloyster to get off a Spike Cannon to bring Nidoran to yellow health. However, the next Hypnosis lands, allowing a couple more Double Edges to get the job done. And now that Scott has made it to Flareon, he's in the exact same situation as I was against Lance's Dragonite, in that he has now functionally won the battle because Flareon's AI will just spam Reflect, meaning that now all Scott has to do is heal with Rest in order to survive the Double Edge recoil, then just spam Double Edge until the battle is over, finally making him champion of the Pokemon League. Results. Nidoran completed its run of Pokemon Blue in 1 hour, 53 minutes, and 28 seconds, and completed its run of Pokemon Yellow in 1 hour, 56 minutes, and 28 seconds, with Blue version being slightly faster by only 3 minutes, meaning that, appropriately enough, Nidoran's time fell exactly between my conservative prediction of 2 hours and Scott's optimistic prediction of 1 hour 50. Conclusion. Gen 1 really had it out for pure Poison-type Pokemon, and Nidoran is no exception. Nidoran's extremely low base stat total meant that in both Blue and Yellow version, we were forced to train to a ridiculously high level to overcome numerous obstacles that many other Pokemon would have been able to breeze past. Granted, Nidoran's super effective type coverage of Thunderbolt and Blizzard are nothing to scoff at, but Nidoran's abysmal special stat meant that even Pokemon who were weak to those moves, such as Pidgeot, Fearow, Gyarados, and Exeggutor, were still not a one-shot most of the time. Additionally, Nidoran's Poison typing is an extreme liability given the abundance of powerful Psychic-type Pokemon in the Kanto region, namely the several Alakazams in both versions, and Venonat, Venomoth, and Slowbro in Yellow version. I also find it fascinating just how different the experience of playing Blue is than the experience of playing Yellow. For example, so many boss trainers have so much more threatening movesets in Yellow than they do in Blue, such as Koga, Blaine, Giovanni, and Lorelei, meaning that weaker Pokemon such as Nidoran will have to train to a higher level to defeat them. Not to mention, many of the Pokemon Pokemon in Blue version that spam do-nothing moves against poison types, thus making them a free win, no longer do that in Yellow. Namely Blaine's Growlithe, the rival's Pidgeot, the rival's Growlithe, Lorelei's Slowbro, and Lance's Dragonairs and Dragonite. So because of all that, I think we've proven that overall Pokemon Yellow is the game with the steeper set of challenges, especially in the mid-game. And in these runs, Nidoran's only saving grace tipping the odds in favor of Yellow version is its superior starting moveset by getting access to Double Kick to get past Brock and the self-destructing Hiker far more efficiently. But again, it's worth keeping in mind that even in spite of that, Scott's playthrough in Yellow was still slower. So my strong speculation is that we would see an even more drastic difference between Blue and Yellow if we were to run this experiment again with a different Pokemon that carried an identical moveset between the two versions. And finally, in addition to considering the differences between the two games, it's also important to keep in mind the differences between two players' approaches to the game itself. For example, in this particular run, Scott was very averse to using his rare candies until as late as possible, whereas I used a few rare candies here and there to get past a few of the mid-game hurdles. And Scott also had very different ideas about which TMs would be useful, insisting on the utility of rest in the champion battle, but also being very averse to Double Edge. So because of that, it's likely that this run could be optimized considerably. But because our tier list is based on each Pokemon's first attempt only, we also have to take into consideration just how intuitive the Pokemon is to play as well. And considering that both Scott and I routinely had to experiment to find exactly the right level and the right moves to win each boss fight, I would say that Nidoran is an especially unintuitive Pokemon to play, thus wasting time. So, all in all, given Nidoran's poor stats, especially its special, poor typing, and generally unimpressive move pool that lacked the real firepower to sweep through most of the game, Nidoran has earned its place firmly in the D tier for Pokemon solo challenges in Gen 1, just above Execute. However, this tier ranking is only for Nidoran male, so if you want to see how Nidoran female performs, you'll have to follow the link in the description to head over to Scott's Thoughts channel. I'll see you in his comment section, and please let him know that I sent you. Till next time everyone, take care.